I forgive you. She wasn't sure if it was for Elon or herself. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe forgiveness didn't need a recipient. It was just a soft release, loosening of the rope she'd knotted around her heart for too long. She thought of her mother, of Geneva's voice ringing out during Sunday cleaning, gospel music loud and proud, of the way her mother used to hum while making cornbread, of her strength in her silence, and the way her love often came in warnings. You're worth more than you think, baby. Leah smiled through tears. She used to resent those words. Now, they felt like an anthem. That afternoon, she laid out a towel and opened her small, cooler fresh fruit, a sandwich, and a small jar of her latest formula, sea salt and whipped cream. She'd brought it to test in the salty air. It's curious how her product held up in humidity. A small boy nearby tripped and fell into the surf, laughing as he sprang up chasing his dog. His mother called after him, and Aaliyah felt something stir something. Gentle and aching, she didn't have children, hadn't thought much about it in the last few years. But now, there was room for wonder again. Later, as the sun began to fall, she dipped her fingers into the cream and massaged it into her arms and legs. The blend melted into her skin with ease, rich, nourishing, and fragrant with eucalyptus and coconut. A woman walking by paused. "Excuse me," she said kindly. "What are you using? It smells divine." Aaliyah looked up, surprised. "Go." "Something I make? Make you sell it?" "I do," she said, smiling. "Geneva Grace. I run a small skincare brand." The woman's eyes lit up. "Do you have a card?" She handed one over, her logo printed in gold script. The woman thanked her and walked on. It was a small moment, but it was hers. No grant, no spotlight. No borrowed dream, just her, the sea, and a stranger who liked the scent of peace on her skin. That evening, Leah sat on the motel balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the moon stretch across the waves. She opened her journal and began to write, not about Elon, not about what she'd lost, but about what was growing. A list of goals, a list of new product ideas, a list of names women she wanted to collaborate with, small businesses to support. A list of affirmations she whispered, aloud, one by one. I am still worthy. I am allowed to heal slowly. I don't need to be remembered to matter. I am building something beautiful. I am becoming. The night wrapped itself around her like a shawl. No headlines, no applause. Just the quiet understanding that some chapters don't need an audience, they need presence. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the waves carry her into sleep, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't dream of what could have been. She dreamed of what was finally beginning, the scent of roasted almonds. Honey-glazed pastries and burning incense drifted through the open-air market like a slow-moving hymn. It was Saturday. Aaliyah had secured a booth at the monthly Her Roots Collective pop-up in the heart of the Arts District. Vibrant celebration of Black women-owned businesses. It's filled with color, soul, and unapologetic brilliance. Her booth, as always, was serene and soft linen draped over a wooden table. Glass jars lined up like tiny altars, each labeled with her elegant Geneva Grace script. The body butters, sugar scrubs, and herbal oils shimmered in the morning light. Surrounded by sprigs of dried lavender and eucalyptus, she wore a mustard-wrapped dress today, cinched at the waist, with gold hoops and bare feet in leather sandals. Her curls were soft and full, crowning her head like a halo. This was her space, her rhythm, her power. Customers came and went, lingering longer than they intended, drawn in not just by the products but by the calm that lived in Aaliyah's presence. She spoke softly, asked questions about their skin and routines, and offered small samples with open palms and warm eyes. Every sale wasn't just income, it was intimacy. A connection between healer and healed. Your honey almond balm smells like my grandmother's kitchen, one woman said, eyes closed as she pressed the balm to her wrist. Aaliyah smiled. Yes. That's exactly where the idea came from. Bomber bestseller was born in memory of late nights with Geneva baking cornbread and stirring warm honey into mugs of tea. The scent was nostalgia, wrapped in nourishment. Next to it, sat her newest product, a smoke and honey facial steam blend. Dried rose petals, frankincense resin, honey crystals, and black sage mint to cleanse both the skin and the soul. She hadn't even posted it online yet. She wanted to launch it here among her people, where feedback came in the form of smiles, stories, and sisterhood. By mid-afternoon, she had nearly sold out. Kendra arrived to help her restock samples, balancing a drink. In one hand and a grin on her face, "Girl," she said, fanning herself. "You are on fire today," Aaliyah chuckled. "I'm trying." "No," Kendra said seriously, "you're doing. Big difference." They clinked paper coffee cups in celebration. As they chatted, a young woman approached the booth. She was slender, sharp-featured, and wore a crisp white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans. Her energy was different, more business than bliss, but she was polite and curious. "This is beautiful," she said, picking up a sample of the honey almond balm. "Do you wholesale?" Leah hesitated. "I'm open to it, but I've only recently scaled up. I'm still getting systems in place. I manage supplier outreach for a boutique wellness store downtown, Root and Ritual. We feature women-owned brands, especially Black artisans. Would you be open to a conversation?" Aaliyah blinked. "Wait, seriously." The woman handed her a card. "Let's talk next week. We're looking for authenticity, not mass production.
Yes.
And I can tell this comes from somewhere real." Kendra squealed the moment the woman walked away, grabbing Aaliyah's arm. "That's huge, Leah. Root and Ritual is like top tier." Leah just stood there, heart full. So many nights she had doubted this moment would ever come.
So many.
Nights she lay awake wondering if Geneva Grace was just a way to fill the emptiness left behind. But here she was on her own, radiant and finally seen for something she built. Not as someone's girlfriend. Not as someone's footnote, as herself. That night, she returned home with aching feet and joy buzzing in her chest. She lit a candle, brewed a cup of cinnamon tea, sat on her little couch, staring at the card from Root and Ritual. She ran her fingers over the words like a prayer. Then, she opened her journal. June 14th, asterisk, asterisk. Today. I smelled like honey and smoke, and I sold peace in jars. A woman wants to carry my name into her store. My story is starting to sound like mine again. I am soft, but I am steel. I am still rising. Asterisk, asterisk, she looked. Around her modest apartment, at the shelves of ingredients she now stocked with care, at the labels she'd designed herself, at the packages ready to ship to customers who had found her through word of mouth and social media, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Settled not, because everything was perfect, but because she no longer needed someone else's. Success to feel worthy of her own. The morning light filtered through Aaliyah's bedroom curtains in soft, golden streaks. The apartment was quiet, still heavy with sleep, except for the gentle whir of the ceiling fan, and the occasional creak of the building settling into another day. She sat at the edge of her bed, wrapped in her favorite cotton robe, a steaming cup of hibiscus tea in her hand. The mirror across from her leaned slightly against the wall, tall and elegant, the frame painted sage green. It had once belonged to her mother, Geneva used to say. A mirror could never lie, but it could also never tell the full truth. Aaliyah stared into it now. At the woman staring back, she looked different. Not just older, though the fine lines beneath her eyes told of long nights and heavier days. Not just thinner, though, her face had lost some of its softness, its once rounded cheeks now shaped with quiet endurance. But there was something deeper, a knowing, a resilience, calm, and maybe even a little sadness, tucked quietly in the corners. Of her mouth, she sipped her tea slowly. In a few hours, she had a call scheduled with Root and Ritual. Kendra had helped her pull together a presentation deck. She'd photographed every jar, every label, even recorded a short video explaining the process behind her newest product, smoke and honey. She should have felt excited. But what she felt was exposed, like the mirror had caught her in a moment, where the past and future blurred. She was being asked to choose which one to carry forward. For a long time, Aaliyah had equated success with love. with being chosen, with being worthy because someone else said she was. And when Elon had soared without her, a part of her had shrunk, was convinced that she had been nothing more than scaffolding, as she once had meant to be taken. Down once the structure stood tall, but now she had her own structure, her own rhythm and still. There were moments like now when the quiet, whispered questions she didn't want to answer. Would he have stayed if you'd been tougher? Did you make yourself too easy to leave? Would you even be here if he hadn't broken you first? She blinked and looked away from the mirror. The truth was, healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight path from pain to peace. It was a messy loop, some days triumphant, others heavy with grief that arrived uninvited. And some days it was both, victory laced with ache. She set her cup down and stood, caned to the mirror slowly. This time, she leaned in close, not to criticize, not to correct, but to see. Really see? Her skin glowed subtly, honestly. Her eyes held stories no one could guess. Her collarbone was more prominent. Yes, but she carried it like armor now. She didn't look like the Aaliyah who sold her mother's house. She didn't look like the Aaliyah who cried quietly in a truck behind a diner. She looked like a woman who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and lived through both. She whispered to her reflection, "You didn't deserve the silence, but you survived it." And suddenly, the mirror didn't feel so honest after all, because it couldn't reflect the long nights she'd soothed herself to sleep, or the mornings she'd gotten up when it felt impossible. It couldn't show the invisible muscles she'd built in her spirit just to keep moving forward. It couldn't display the forgiveness she'd handed herself, piece by piece, like salve to a wound only she could see. What the mirror didn't say was just as powerful as what it did. Later that day, she logged into the Zoom call with the buyers from Root and Ritual. Aaliyah took a deep breath. Her hands were steady, her voice clear. She walked them through her brand, her process, her why. "I created Geneva Grace," she said near the end, "because I needed to reclaim my softness. I had hardened myself for love, for survival, for disappointment. And one day, I realized I was craving gentleness again. This brand is my way of giving that to myself and to anyone else who needs it." The screen was quiet for a second. Then one of the women, Jasmine, the manager, nodded slowly. "That's beautiful, Aaliyah. It's exactly what we're looking for. Real care, real intention." They talked numbers, quantities, timelines. When the call ended, Aaliyah let out a long breath. Not a sigh of relief, but one of arrival. She had shown up fully. Scars, softness, story and all. And they had seen her. Not just her work. Her. She stood again, walked back to the mirror, and this time she didn't stare. She smiled, and the woman looking back smiled too. There was a shoebox tucked beneath Aaliyah's bed. It's not fancy, just a plain worn box with the lid half cracked, filled with scraps of her heart she hadn't yet had the courage to throw away. Inside were things most people would have tossed out long ago. An old receipt from the night she and Elon ate tacos in the back of the truck. A faded photo booth strip of them laughing uncontrollably. A grocery list she'd scribbled during one of their hungriest weeks. And a small manila envelope stuffed with letters. Letters she had written. Letters she had never sent. That Saturday evening, after restocking her shelves and updating her online store, Aaliyah sat on the floor with the box in her lap. Rain tapped softly against the window. It was the kind of weather that slowed the world down just enough to make the past knock gently at your door. She hadn't opened the envelope in nearly a year. She did now. The first letter was short, written in rushed handwriting. "Elon, I know things are hard right now. I'm tired too. But I believe in you. I believe in us. Please don't shut me out. We're better when we remember what brought us here." She remembered writing it after a week of silence from him. She still clung to the idea that enough love could break through stone. The second one was longer, angrier. "I sold my mother's house, Elon. My mother's house. And you didn't even say thank you. Not once. You just took the money and kept building like I was some ghost behind you. I'm not a ghost. I'm the one who's been keeping you alive while you try to save the world." She folded that one quickly. unable to read the rest. The heat of it still burned through the page. Then there was the letter that hurt most. You're going to make it. Elon, I know you are. But I think I might disappear in the process. I'm scared you won't even notice. That one was written in the truck, by candlelight. On a night she'd gone to bed with an empty stomach and his back turned toward her. She'd written it, cried, and slipped it into the envelope, telling herself she would never read it again. And yet here she was. But as she continued through the pile, something shifted. The letters became less about him and more about her. One said, I want to be the kind of woman who can stand in a room and not shrink, who can walk into her dreams without apology, who doesn't need to be chosen to feel chosen. Another, maybe I needed to break to remember what I'm made of. Maybe strength isn't about holding on. Maybe it's about letting go and still waking up the next day and loving yourself anyway. And finally, the last one, I think I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I can't carry this forever. I want my arms free for better things, for softer things. Aaliyah leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, pressing the envelope against her chest. There was a strange kind of peace in seeing it all, her journey written in raw, unfiltered fragments.
Ow!
She realized now that these letters weren't really for Elon. They were for her. Little lifelines she'd thrown out into the dark. When she wasn't sure she'd make it to shore, but she had made it. Not perfectly. Not without pain, but she had made it. And now, her life was unfolding not in grand gestures or magazine headlines, but in small, meaningful victories. A new stockist for her products, a return customer who said her balm helped calm panic attacks, a journal filled with ideas that came straight from her spirit. She placed the letters back in the envelope carefully, tied them with a piece of twine, and wrote on the front, Aaliyah the Becoming. Then she tucked it back into the box. This time, though she didn't slide the box back under the bed, she placed it on the shelf between her journals and her business. Ledgers not to forget, but to remember. To remember that she was not a woman waiting for someone to love her back into existence. She was a woman who had written herself back into the world. Later that night, as she lay under her favorite quilt, the rain still whispering against the window, Aaliyah reached for her phone not to check on Elon or scroll through the curated lives of others, but to draft something new, an email to herself. Subject, Dear Me Body, *, you were never too much. You were never asking for too much. You were always enough. Thank you for surviving what tried to silence you. Thank you for choosing to stay soft, even when the world demanded you harden. I love who you're becoming. Keep going. You're almost there. *, she hit send. Because sometimes, the letter that changes everything isn't the one you send to someone else. It's the one you finally send to yourself. The first time Geneva Grace was featured on local television, Aaliyah almost didn't show up. She had been invited to speak on a morning lifestyle segment titled Women Who Rise, a spotlight on small business owners and community change makers. The producer had discovered her products at Root and Ritual and was instantly drawn to the story on her product tags. Born from healing, rooted in truth. Aaliyah read the email 3 times before responding. Even now, standing backstage in a modest green room, palms sweating, she wasn't sure she'd made the right decision. The mirror in front of her was lined with bulbs that cast a harsh, theatrical light across her face. She stared at her reflection, her stomach fluttering with nerves. Her makeup was minimal, just a soft lip gloss and a bit of powder. Her hair was styled in a loose puff pinned at the back with a gold comb. She wore a rust-colored blouse and high-waisted black trousers. Elegant, intentional, still her, still her. But inside, her old doubts clawed at the edges. What if your voice shakes? What if they ask about Elon? What if you forget who you are? She closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. No, not today. Today. She remembered she was no longer the woman who whispered her worth into letters she never sent. She was no longer the woman who shrank herself in the shadows of someone else's spotlight. She had earned this. The producer knocked gently. You're up in 5. Aaliyah nodded and stood, grounding herself with each step. The interview started. Simply enough, the host, a polished woman with a bright smile and impeccable curls, welcomed her warmly. "We're thrilled to have you here today, Aaliyah. Geneva Grace has quickly become one of the most beloved skincare lines in the city, and people are curious what inspired it." Aaliyah smiled softly. Pain, actually, and then healing. Host tilted her head. "Do tell." Aaliyah took a breath. "A few years ago, I lost everything I thought made me secure: my home, my relationship, my sense of direction. I gave until there was nothing left. When I hit rock bottom, I had two choices: remain broken or rebuild with intention. I chose to start with care." Skincare became a metaphor, really. It was about tending to wounds, external and internal. At the host's smile softened. "That's powerful," Aaliyah continued, more confidently now. "I wanted to make products that weren't just beautiful but meaningful, something that invited people to slow down and treat themselves like they matter, because they do." The segment continued with product demos, questions about ingredients, sustainability, her growth journey. But toward the end, the host's tone changed slightly. "We heard that you were once connected to Elon, the clean energy entrepreneur." Aaliyah's heart skipped. There it was. She paused just long enough to choose honesty over fear. "Yes," she said calmly. "We were close. And that chapter taught me more about myself than I can say." The host looked intrigued. "Are you still in touch?" Aaliyah's voice didn't waver. "We've spoken. Briefly, but we walked different paths." Now, there was no bitterness. No drama. Just truth. And it felt freeing. After the segment aired, Aaliyah stepped outside the studio into the cool morning air. The sky was pale blue, the sun just beginning to warm the city's brick and concrete. She took off her blazer and let the breeze touch her skin. Her phone buzzed, non-stop congratulatory texts, emails, new orders pouring into her online store. A message from Kendra. "You did that. You were fire, sis." But one message stood out. From a number she hadn't saved. "I saw the interview. You looked strong. Proud of you." Elon stared at the screen, and then deleted the message. Without replying, she wasn't angry. She just wasn't that woman anymore. The fire he'd walked through her to build. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes, and this time, the flame was hers. That evening, back in her apartment, Aaliyah stood at her work table, pouring fresh shea butter into new glass jars. She hummed softly to herself, an old gospel tune her mother used to sing while braiding her hair. A soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find an older woman holding a clipboard. "Ms. Aaliyah Grace?" the woman asked. "Yes. I'm with the Ember Grant Foundation. You were nominated by Root and Ritual for our annual Creative Women's Grant. $25,000 towards scaling a business rooted in community wellness. We reviewed your products and your story. I'm here to tell you, you've won." Aaliyah blinked. "What?" "You've won," the woman repeated, smiling warmly. "And we'd like to feature you as our keynote speaker at this year's gala." Her hand flew to her chest, mouth open in shock. I don't know what to say." The woman grinned. "Say you'll keep doing what you're doing. It's working." That night, Aaliyah sat at her window with a fresh cup of cinnamon tea, her journal in her lap. She didn't write a letter this time. She wrote a declaration. Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't just survive. The fire, I became it, and I am learning to burn for myself now. Not to keep someone else warm. Let the next chapter rise. Asterisk, asterisk, the night air hummed with city sounds horns in the distance. Footsteps on sidewalks, laughter from a rooftop bar a few blocks away. Aaliyah stood on her balcony, wrapped in a soft shawl. Staring out over the quiet slice of skyline she could see from her apartment, the Ember Grant letter sat on her kitchen counter, the gold-embossed seal still catching the light. Whenever she walked past it, she hadn't touched it since the woman delivered it. Not because she wasn't. Excited she was. Not because she doubted. She deserved it. She didn't anymore. But because something inside her, still making room for what this moment meant. For so long, Aaliyah had moved with the silent, aching belief that success needed to look a certain way, that healing had to come wrapped in someone else's praise, that love needed to be earned through sacrifice, and yet here she was granted. Everything she once thought she'd only find through someone else, by becoming herself. She sat down slowly, pulled out her journal, and flipped to a fresh page. The header came without hesitation. Things I thought I needed but didn't. She began writing. Asterisk, I thought I needed someone to choose me to feel worthy. I thought I needed a partner to fulfill a dream. I thought I needed a house to feel like I belonged somewhere. I thought I needed to be softer to be loved. I thought I needed to shrink so someone else could shine. I thought I needed to be saved. Asterisk, she paused, her pen tapping gently against the page. Then she drew a line beneath. Those confessions and kept going. What I actually needed was to choose myself when no one else would, to believe my dream was enough on its own, to know that a home is not walls, but peace, to realize that softness is strength, not weakness, to understand that love doesn't require disappearance, and to learn that I was never lost who's becoming. She closed the journal slowly, her chest swelling not with pride but with clarity. For so long she'd chased answers in empty spaces. Now those spaces had become gardens. The next day, Aaliyah stood in front of the old duplex she used to drive past when she first started Geneva Grace. It had a small storefront on the ground floor and an apartment above, weathered, humble, but full of potential. She'd passed it so many times that the image of her future self opening its doors started to haunt her dreams. Now, with the Ember Grant money on the way, she had the means to make it real. She met with the realtor inside. The space smelled like age and dust, but the bones were good brick walls. Original hardwood floors, natural light from a tall front window. This would be perfect for your shop, Kendra said, running her fingers across the counter. A little studio, a store, a space for healing. I see it. Aaliyah nodded. So do I. It wasn't just a store, it was a rebirth. She imagined shelves of glass jars, handwritten product notes, maybe even a corner for journaling and tea, a place for women like her to walk in and remember themselves. No ring on their finger. No man beside them. Just them. Whole, seen, sacred. That night, she returned home and received an unexpected email. Subject, you probably won't read this, but it was from Elon. She hovered her mouse over the subject line for a long moment before finally clicking. Aaliyah, I watched the full interview. I've been watching from a distance, honestly. I saw the feature about the Ember Grant. You deserve every bit of it. I've replayed what I did, how I let ambition swallow what we had. You gave me everything, and I gave you silence. Not because you weren't enough, but because I didn't know how to be anything but consumed. I see you now. See what I lost. I don't expect a reply. I just needed you to know. Thank you for believing in me, and I'm sorry. Aaliyah stared at the message. No anger rose in her chest, just stillness. She typed a short reply. Elon. Asterisk, thank you for saying that. I'm no longer holding on to what we could have been. I'm holding on to who I've become. Asterisk, she clicked send and leaned back in her chair, a small smile breaking across her face. Not because he reached out, but because she didn't need anything from him anymore. Not closure. Not an apology. Not permission. She had found all of that inside herself. The mirror in her bedroom caught a slant of golden light as the sun dipped below the skyline. Aaliyah stood before it, not to fix her hair or critique her reflection, but to honor the woman who had once believed she needed so much. To become someone, and who now knew she'd always been enough. There was no red ribbon, no catered spread, no celebrity launch post on social media, just a bell above the door, scent of lavender and bergamot in the air, and the soft hum of a playlist. Aaliyah curated herself a blend of lo-fi jazz and old-school soul, like the kind her mother used to play on Saturday mornings. The store was open, her store, Geneva Grace Apothecary. The front window bore her name in handwritten gold script, with delicate vines stenciled along the edges. Inside, the space was warm and gentle, exposed brick walls, natural wood shelving, and soft baskets filled with hand-labeled products. Each item had a small card beside it with not just ingredients but intention. For grief, for rebirth. For the days you forget who you are. The room was more than retail. It was sanctuary. Aaliyah had painted the walls herself. She'd stayed up late, unpacking boxes, handwriting, thank you notes, folding linen towels. In arranging the front counter with offerings she called reminders mini jars of her original bomb, each with a tag that simply read, "You are allowed to begin again." When she unlocked the door that morning, there was no crowd, just her, and that was enough. She sat behind the counter, heart full, sipping from a ceramic mug that Kendra had gifted her. It said, "Built from grace, not validation," at 10:30. The first customer arrived. A young woman, early 20s, eyes rimmed with fatigue, walked in quietly as though unsure whether she belonged. She browsed for a moment, fingers gently tracing the edges of a facial oil bottle. Aaliyah stepped forward with a smile. "First time here." The girl nodded. "I make everything myself," Aaliyah offered, motioning to the shelf. "What are you looking for?" The girl hesitated. "Something calming. My anxiety's been through the roof." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "I've been there," she said softly. "Come with me." She led her to a small corner shelf with honey steam sachets and a lavender-infused clay mask. "This is what helped me," she said. "I used to feel like I couldn't even breathe." The girl picked up the sachet and smiled faintly. "Smells like peace." Aaliyah nodded. "That's the goal." By noon, 3 more people had come through. One of them was a woman from the neighborhood who had seen her feature on Women Who Rise. Another was a man buying a gift for his sister who just had a baby. And the third was someone Aaliyah never expected to see. Nora, her oldest friend. The one who used to roll her eyes at Elon. The one who stopped calling after the truck, after the foreclosure. After Aaliyah stopped being the version of herself Nora could understand. Nora walked in slowly, guilt and awe mixing on her face. "Aaliyah," she breathed. Aaliyah smiled, surprised but calm. "Hey, stranger. Wasn't sure if I should come. But I saw the post, and I wanted to see it for myself. All of it." A moment passed between them. Not heavy, just real. "I wasn't fair to you," Nora said. "I judged what I didn't understand." "You were scared for me," Aaliyah replied. "And maybe. I was too far in to hear you. We both lost something." They stood quietly. Then Nora reached for a jar of calendula oil. "I've been having these flare-ups. Stress, I guess. Would this help?" Aaliyah nodded, her smile soft. "It's gentle and healing. You'll like it." They stood at the counter. No longer as who they were, but who they were willing to be now. By closing time, Aaliyah had sold more than she expected. Not just products, but presents. People lingered. They read the tags. They asked questions. They stayed, and when she locked the door that evening, turning the open sign to closed, she did it with a reverence she couldn't explain. Because the truth was, this wasn't just a shop, it was a wound. Stitched. A chapter rewritten. A prayer answered slowly over time. She walked through the store, flipping off the lights one by one, till only the golden glow of the front window remained. Then she sat by the register and pulled out her journal, writing, "By lamplight. March 9th *. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't have to become louder to be heard. I opened the door. The right people walked in. Quietly, softly, honestly, just. Like me, * Geneva, grace isn't about skincare. It's about remembrance. And today, I remembered myself." She closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. Then, she stood in the quiet of her dream made real. She whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Mama." Joy, Aaliyah had learned, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it tiptoed in through the back door, sat down quietly at your table, and waited to be noticed. It wasn't the kind of emotion that screamed in fireworks or made grand entrances. No, the kind of joy that mattered, the kind she was beginning to understand, felt like warm socks on a cold morning, or the hum of the kettle before the water boiled. That kind of joy had shaped, and now Aaliyah could finally feel it. She woke up on a Sunday morning to the smell of cinnamon and almond oil. The sun was shining through the small curtain in her kitchen, casting golden stripes across her floors. The scent was from a small batch of bombs she'd left to set overnight. She padded in barefoot, wrapped in a faded Ankara robe her mother once wore, and stood in the middle of her home one she had filled. Piece by piece, with intention. The walls had art from local women. Ashes. Her shelves held books that had held her. In her darkest moments, her table was scattered with product samples, notes for new formulas, and a fresh bouquet of sunflowers. Aaliyah didn't need permission to feel whole anymore, and that realization, that was joy. Later that afternoon, she hosted her first rest circle at the shop, a monthly gathering she created for women to come together and just be. No agenda. No business cards. No need to prove anything, just soft conversation, tea, and the gentle return to themselves. 6 women came. Different shades of black, different ages, different wounds and wins. They sat in a circle of floor cushions and folding chairs near the front window. Aaliyah brewed loose-leaf hibiscus tea with dried orange peel and mint and passed around small jars of her ease. Balm for everyone to rub into their hands before beginning. The theme for the day was the shape of joy. Aaliyah opened the circle. With a quiet prompt, what does joy look like for you today? Not what it should look like. It's not what it used to. Not just today. A long silence followed, the kind that feels like rainwater soaking into dry earth. Then a woman in her 50s spoke first. Joy for me today, she said slowly, is not waking up to someone's disappointment in me. Another woman said, mine is brushing my daughter's hair this morning without rushing. A third said, joy for me was walking into this room. I almost didn't come. When the circle reached Aaliyah, she smiled softly. Joy for me, she said, is realizing I don't have to apologize for wanting softness. I used to think strength meant staying when it hurt. Now I know strength is leaving and still believing I'm worthy of more. The women nodded. One reached for her hand, another wiped a tear. They talked for hours about fatigue and family, dreams and doubt, body care and heartache. They laughed. They cried. One woman read a poem from her journal. Another handed out tiny seed packets so we can all grow something, even if it's just basil on the windowsill. By the end of the gathering, the room felt like a womb. Safe, sacred, rooted. Aaliyah watched them leave one by one, hugging each other, exchanging numbers, promising to return next month. She sat alone in the aftermath, the room still scented with frankincense and citrus, and realized something beautiful. She wasn't filling a space anymore. She was holding it, and there was power in that night. She called Kendra. Her best friend answered on the second ring.
Aaliyah.
Everything, Aaliyah laughed. It was, holy Kendra. I didn't even plan it to feel that way. But those women came in as strangers and left like they'd found their people. That's what happens when you lead with heart, Kendra said. You don't even realize you're building sanctuary. Aaliyah looked around the shop, still glowing from the string lights above the shelves. I used to think joy had to come after the storm, but maybe it was the shelter all along. Kendra was quiet for a moment, then whispered, girl, write that down. They both laughed, and Aaliyah promised to call again soon. After she hung up, she poured a cup of chamomile tea and opened her journal, flipping to a blank page. She wrote, March 23rd, joy. Isn't waiting for me at the end of some finish line. It's sitting beside me while I build. It looks like a full room, a warm mug, the smell of almond and mint. Joy is not loud. It's present. And I'm learning to stay present too. She closed the journal and stepped out onto the small stoop outside the shop, breathing in the crisp night air. No one needed to see this moment. No camera. No applause, just her, wrapped in a shawl, barefoot on the earth, smiling to herself under the moonlight. This was what joy looked like. Today, and it was enough. The shop was glowing. Warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk from the front windows of Geneva Grace Apothecary, casting a halo around the entrance as if the building itself was breathing peace into the street. Inside, everything looked as it should, shelves stocked, candles burning, soft music humming low, but Aaliyah was holding her breath. The email had arrived an hour before closing. It was from her supplier in Ganatha, one she trusted for her. Raw, shea butter, and oils. Due to port closures and new trade tariffs, her next 2 shipments were indefinitely delayed. Without them, she couldn't fulfill several large orders. Orders she needed not only for revenue, but for reputation. She reread the email 3 times, seated on the stool behind the register, her fingers curled into her lap. The thrill from the rest circle a few days ago had barely settled, and now, this dot light always cost something. Her mother had said that once. Not during one of her spiritual lessons or deep talks, but while fixing a broken lamp in their old living room. Geneva had jiggled the cord, twisted the bulb, and muttered, "Everything good needs tending, even light." Leah now understood what she meant. The joy she had found, the peace she had built, required maintenance. It required fight. Not the exhausting kind she had once poured into Elon, but a new kind. A fight to keep growing. A fight to keep choosing herself when fear whispered otherwise. Aaliyah closed her laptop and stared out the window. The street lamp, flickering as people passed by in coats and scarves. She had options. She could cancel the orders, issue apologies, offer refunds, or she could find another way. The next morning, she got to work early, before sunrise. She brewed tea, lit a single candle, and pulled out a notebook titled Contingencies. It was one she had created when Geneva Grace was still just an idea, filled with what-if scenarios and possible pivots. She ran her fingers over the pages. Local alternatives, formulation tweaks, small batch substitutions. She started calling nearby suppliers, small farms, herbal cops. She explained the situation with honesty, no desperation, just clarity. She didn't want to compromise on quality, but she needed a bridge. Something to hold her over until Ghana reopened its ports by noon. She had 2 callbacks and 1 promising lead from a farm in South Carolina. The shea butter wasn't West African, but it was organic, and the founder, a woman named Clarice, resonated deeply with Aaliyah's mission. "We've been watching your rise, sister," Clarice said over the phone. "I think we can help you stay afloat without you losing your essence." One sentence made Aaliyah's eyes well with tears. Stay afloat without losing your essence. Wasn't that the hardest part of all of this? Not just surviving, but surviving intact. She wiped her eyes and smiled. Let's do it. That week, Aaliyah worked around the clock, testing new blends, reworking labels, sending update emails to her customers. She refused to ghost them, the way Elon once ghosted her when plans crumbled. She believed people deserved the truth, and she believed her brand could weather transparency. The surprising part, they responded with grace. Messages came pouring in. "Thank you for letting us know. Still placing my order? We're rooting for you. Pivot and press on. Your products have saved my skin and my peace. We're not going anywhere." She read every single one, her chest tightening with gratitude. Aaliyah had once been afraid that losing Elon meant losing everything. Now, she saw that losing him had cleared the path to everything that was real. Saturday came, and with it, her first restocked batch of product using Clarice's butter. The texture was slightly different, creamier, with a subtle nutty scent, but when she rubbed it into her palms, it melted the same way. It still whispered softness into the skin. She placed the new jars on the shelves with care. Each one carried more than balm. It carried a story of resilience. Aaliyah stood in the center of the shop and exhaled deeply. The fear hadn't disappeared. The what-if still lingered, but so did she, still standing, still glowing. She grabbed her journal from the back room and sat at the little writing nook she'd placed near the front window. Customers would sometimes write poems or gratitude notes there, but today, it was hers again. March 30th sometimes. Joy costs truth. Sometimes it costs a reintroduction to yourself. But what it never costs, what it should never cost, is your soul. I used to pay with everything I had loved. Dignity. Silence just to keep someone else shining. Now I've learned to invest instead. Invest in peace, in honesty, in light that does not burn me. Asterisk, this brand, this space, this life I'm building, it's not fragile, it's forged. Asterisk, she closed the journal and stood in running her fingers along the counter. The store wasn't perfect. The supply chain wasn't stable. Her heart still had its bruises. But her light was on, and she was learning how to tend to it, even when the cord flickered, even when the lamp shook, even when it cost her more than she expected, because the cost of light was nothing compared to the cost of forgetting your own fire. The knock came just after closing. 3 soft taps on the glass door insert. But deliberate, Aaliyah was in the back room wiping down her shelves, hands scented with eucalyptus and beeswax, her playlist winding down to a mellow hum of violins. She froze, not out of fear but instinct. The shop was closed. The "Sorry, we're closed" sign hung clearly in the window. Whoever was knocking knew that. She stepped out quietly, her keys already in hand to kindly turn them away. But when she reached the front and saw who it was, her breath caught in her throat. Elon. He looked older, not in the obvious way, his face still sharp, his build still lean, but something had shifted in his eyes. They held less fire, more fog. He was dressed simply in a navy pullover, dark jeans, and shoes that looked far too clean for someone who claimed to still be in the lab. For a moment, neither of them moved. The street behind him buzzed with life cars idling, music playing from a passing bicycle butt inside. Time stood still. Aaliyah stepped forward and unlocked the door, just wide enough to slip through and join him on the sidewalk. "I wasn't sure you'd open," Elon said quietly. "I wasn't sure you'd knock," she replied, folding her arms. They stood facing each other, like 2 old roads that once crossed violently, now meeting again quietly. Gently, but no longer headed in the same direction. He looked past her into the store. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's mine," she answered. "Everything in there is mine, built without shortcuts or shadows." Elon nodded, eyes lingering on the jars lining the shelves. "I heard about the grant, the press, the partnership with Root and Ritual." "I have," she said, "and I'm still building." There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. He cleared his throat. "Can we talk? I won't take long." She hesitated. Every part of her screamed not to open that door again, not physically, not emotionally, but something inside her, something healed, said it was time. Not to reconnect, but to release. She motioned to the small bench just outside the shop. Under the wooden sign with her mother's name in gold cursive, Geneva Grace Apothecary. They sat. Elon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been back in town a few months, took a job consulting. Smaller scale, quiet, needed to regroup." Aaliyah said nothing. She waited. She waited. "I keep thinking about what I did," he continued, eyes fixed on the ground. "How I used your love like fuel, and then walked away the moment I had enough to take off. I didn't know how to say thank you without feeling like I owed you everything." "Didn't owe me everything," Aaliyah said calmly. "You just owed me respect, presence, honesty." "I know," he whispered. "And I didn't have that to give. Not then." She nodded. "You didn't, and I kept pretending that if I gave more, you'd eventually give something back." They sat in silence for a moment, the night air thick with everything unspoken. "I came here tonight," Elon said slowly, "not to win you back, not to rewrite the story, to say something I should have said a long time ago." He turned to her, eyes honest, wounded, human. "You didn't just believe in me, you saved me. And I didn't know how to love someone who saw all of me, because I hadn't accepted myself yet." Aaliyah swallowed. His words landed like soft punches, not enough to break her, but enough to stir old echoes. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I appreciate you saying it." He looked at her, truly looked. "You're different," he said. "I'm free," she corrected. They sat there under the street lamp, surrounded by a world that kept moving, a world that no longer revolved around the two of them. And it felt right. "You loved me at my lowest," Elon said. "I loved you past my own," she replied. He stood, placing his hands in his pockets. "You won't hear from me again, I promise."
Yes.
I just needed to. Close the door the right way. Smiled gently. "Sometimes closure isn't a door, it's a window you open to let the past out." Elon nodded, understanding. Then he turned and walked away into the night, his figure shrinking with each step until he melted into the crowd. Aaliyah stood still, hands at her side, the sign above her catching the moonlight. She walked back inside the shop, locking the door behind her, and turned off the final lamp. The shop, her sanctuary, was quiet, but her heart. It was clear. That night, she sat at her desk with a fresh candle and a blank page in her journal. April 3rd, he came back, not to reopen the wound, but to acknowledge it this time. I didn't shake, I didn't ache, I didn't wish, I just listened. And then, it's like go. Closure isn't something they give you, it's something you grow into. He walked away, but I walked forward. Aaliyah closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside a small photograph of her mother, tucked in a frame of soft gold. Then she blew out the candle. The past had knocked, but it no longer had a key. The photograph had sat on the highest shelf of Aaliyah's store since the day it opened, tucked between 2 jars of rose clay mask and a small vase of dried eucalyptus. Customers rarely noticed it, but Aaliyah always knew it was there, watching, blessing, holding space. It was the only photo she had of her mother smiling wide. Geneva Grace, in a sun hat and floral blouse, standing outside their childhood church, her hand resting on a young Aaliyah's shoulder. Her laugh was frozen in the image, joyful and full, the way Aaliyah always tried to remember her. On this particular morning, Aaliyah stood in front of that photo, mug of lemon tea in her hand, watching the sunlight pour through the windows and pool on the hardwood floor. Her heart was quiet, still but full. It was her mother's birthday, not the kind of day that brought sadness anymore. It brought reflection, celebration, a soft, sacred kind of remembrance. Aaliyah reached for her notebook and sat cross-legged on the floor near the display of herbal tonics. She opened to a blank page and titled it, Things My Mother Knew. She began writing 1. That silence doesn't always mean peace. 2. That you can love someone and still have to walk away. 3. That a home is not made of walls. It's made of how you're spoken to inside it. 4. That beauty is not a thing you buy. It's a way you heal. 5. That you can't pour from an empty cup, but that won't stop people from asking you to. She paused. These weren't just things her mother knew. They were things she had lived, woven into every soft warning, every quiet look, every bedtime prayer. When Aaliyah thought she wasn't listening, she flipped to the next page. 6. That the world won't always see your softness as power. So you have to learn to wear it like armor. 7. That sometimes the people who say I love you are the ones who need your boundaries the most. 8. That legacy isn't land or jewelry or a house. Legacy is how someone feels when they say your name after you're gone. Aaliyah looked up at the photo again. Her throat tightened, not from grief, but from gratitude. Her mother had left her a house. True, but what she left within her was far more valuable. The courage to choose truth, the wisdom to leave when love became too heavy, the grace to begin again. Later that day, she invited Kendra over for lunch. They sat at the tiny table near the window where the sun soaked into their shoulders and the scent of roasted sweet potatoes and thyme filled the air. Today's Mom's birthday, Aaliyah said. Kendra paused mid-bite. Oh wow. Geneva Grace. I remember her so clearly. Sharp tongue, even sharper eyes. Aaliyah laughed. She could cut you with a look, but she was soft too, Kendra added. I remember the way she made tea like it was a ritual, and how she'd hum while braiding your hair. She wasn't just strong, she was rooted. Aaliyah nodded, blinking back tears. I didn't understand her when I was younger. I thought she was too hard on me, too judgmental, especially about Elon. Kendra was quiet for a moment, then said, She didn't see him. She saw what you were about to lose. That hit deep. Aaliyah leaned back, her hand resting over her chest. She saw what I didn't want to admit, that I was trading myself for the hope that someone would finally stay. And now? Kendra asked. Aaliyah smiled. Ow. I've learned to stay with me, That's the only promise I can keep." They clinked glasses in silent agreement. That evening, Aaliyah returned to the shop alone. She placed a small cupcake on the counter and lit a single candle, vanilla-scented, her mother's favorite. No music, no fanfare. Just her, the candle, and the memory of the woman who had given her everything without apology. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Mama, for your prayers, your warnings, your strength. I didn't understand you then, but I carry you now." She let the candle burn down, the flame soft and steady, before leaving. She added one more item to her shelf, a small card in a gold frame. It read, "Things my mother knew, asterisk that every woman is. A house of light, that even when broken, she can glow. That healing isn't loud, it's faithful." Asterisk, she placed it beneath the photo, Blessing for every woman who walked through the door. Love looked different now. It wasn't grand declarations. Under moonlight or breathless phone calls in the middle of the night, it didn't ride in on a wave of longing or leave her dizzy with doubt. It didn't ask her to prove herself. It didn't stretch her thin or hollow her out. It didn't come wrapped in potential. It came wrapped in peace. Aaliyah stood in the mirror, adjusting the sleeves of a linen dress, the color of sage leaves. Her hair was in a soft twist out, pinned to one side with a wooden clip shaped like a butterfly. She wasn't dressing up for anyone in particular, just herself. A new ritual, born from the quiet vow she made the night Elon walked away for good. You will not shrink to be loved again. Outside, the rain fell gently, tapping the windows in a rhythm that felt almost intimate. The shop was closed for the day. She had cleared her schedule intentionally, setting time aside for something new, something unplanned. She was going on a date. With Malik, it had started casually. He had visited the shop a few times, mostly quiet, respectful, always buying the same herbal balm and leaving kind notes in the community journal. One day he brought her a bag of dried hibiscus flowers from a local garden with a handwritten note. "In case you want to make your own blend again." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was intentional. "I keep thinking about what I did," he continued, eyes fixed on the ground. "How I used your love like fuel and then walked away the moment I had enough to take off. I didn't know how to say thank you without feeling like I owed you everything." "Didn't owe me everything," Aaliyah said calmly. "You just owed me respect, presence, honesty." "I know," he whispered. "And I didn't have that to give. Not then." She nodded. "You didn't, and I kept pretending that if I gave more, you'd eventually give something back." They sat in silence for a moment, the night air thick with everything unspoken. "I came here tonight," Elon said slowly, "not to win you back, not to rewrite the story, to say something I should have said a long time ago." He turned to her, eyes honest, wounded, human. "You didn't just believe in me, you saved me. And I didn't know how to love someone who saw all of me, because I hadn't accepted myself yet." Aaliyah swallowed. His words landed like soft punches, not enough to break her, but enough to stir old echoes. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I appreciate you saying it." He looked at her, truly looked. "You're different," he said. "I'm free," she corrected. They sat there under the street lamp, surrounded by a world that kept moving, a world that no longer revolved around the two of them. And it felt right. "You loved me at my lowest," Elon said. "I loved you past my own," she replied. He stood, placing his hands in his pockets. "You won't hear from me again, I promise."
Yes.
I just needed to. Close the door the right way. Smiled gently. "Sometimes closure isn't a door, it's a window you open to let the past out." Elon nodded, understanding. Then he turned and walked away into the night, his figure shrinking with each step until he melted into the crowd. Aaliyah stood still, hands at her side, the sign above her catching the moonlight. She walked back inside the shop, locking the door behind her, and turned off the final lamp. The shop, her sanctuary, was quiet, but her heart. It was clear. That night, she sat at her desk with a fresh candle and a blank page in her journal. April 3rd, he came back, not to reopen the wound, but to Acknowledge it this time. I didn't shake. I didn't ache. I didn't wish. I just listened. And then, it's like go. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you grow into. He walked away, but I walked forward. Aaliyah closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside a small photograph of her mother. Tucked in a frame of soft gold, then she blew out the candle. The past had knocked, but it no longer had a key. The photograph had sat on the highest shelf of Aaliyah's store since the day it opened, tucked between 2 jars of rose clay mask and a small vase of dried eucalyptus. Customers rarely noticed it. But Aaliyah always knew it was there, watching, blessing, holding space. It was the only photo she had of her mother smiling wide. Geneva Grace, in a sun hat and floral blouse, standing outside their childhood church, her hand resting on a young Aaliyah's shoulder. Her laugh was frozen in the image, joyful and full. The way Aaliyah always tried to remember her. On this particular morning, Aaliyah stood in front of that photo, mug of lemon tea in her hand, watching the sunlight pour through the windows and pool on the hardwood floor. Her heart was quiet, still but full. It was her mother's birthday, not the kind of day that brought sadness anymore. It brought reflection, celebration, a soft, sacred kind of remembrance. Aaliyah reached for her notebook and sat cross-legged on the floor near the display of herbal tonics. She opened to a blank page and titled it, Things My Mother Knew. She began writing 1. That silence doesn't always mean peace. 2. That you can love someone and still have to walk away. 3. That a home is not made of walls. It's made of how you're spoken to inside it. 4. That beauty is not a thing you buy. It's a way you heal. 5. That you can't pour from an empty cup, but that won't stop people from asking you to. She paused. These weren't just things her mother knew. They were things she had lived, woven into every soft warning, every quiet look, every bedtime prayer. When Aaliyah thought she wasn't listening, she flipped to the next page. 6. That the world won't always see your softness as power. So you have to learn to wear it like armor. 7. That sometimes the people who say I love you are the ones who need your boundaries the most. 8. That legacy isn't land or jewelry or a house. Legacy is how someone feels when they say your name after you're gone. Aaliyah looked up at the photo again. Her throat tightened, not from grief, but from gratitude. Her mother had left her a house. True, but what she left within her was far more valuable. The courage to choose truth, the wisdom to leave when love became too heavy, the grace to begin again. Later that day, she invited Kendra over for lunch. They sat at the tiny table near the window where the sun soaked into their shoulders, and the scent of roasted sweet potatoes and thyme filled the air. Today's Mom's birthday, Aaliyah said. Kendra paused mid-bite. Oh wow. Geneva Grace. I remember her so clearly. Sharp tongue, even sharper eyes. Aaliyah laughed. She could cut you with a look, but she was soft too, Kendra added. I remember the way she made tea like it was a ritual, and how she'd hum while braiding your hair. She wasn't just strong, she was rooted. Aaliyah nodded, blinking back tears. I didn't understand her when I was younger. I thought she was too hard on me, too judgmental, especially about Elon. Kendra was quiet for a moment, then said, She didn't see him. She saw what you were about to lose. That hit deep. Aaliyah leaned back, her hand resting over her chest. She saw what I didn't want to admit, that I was trading myself for the hope that someone would finally stay. And now? Kendra asked. Aaliyah smiled. Ow. I've learned to stay with me. That's the only promise I can keep. They clinked glasses in silent agreement. That evening, Aaliyah returned to the shop alone. She placed a small cupcake on the counter and lit a single candle, vanilla-scented, her mother's favorite. No music, no fanfare. Just her, the candle, and the memory of the woman who had given her everything without apology. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet, Thank you, Mama, for your prayers, your warnings, your strength. I didn't understand you then, but I carry you now. She let the candle burn down, the flame soft and steady, before leaving. She added one more item to her shelf, a small card in a gold frame. It read, "Things my mother knew, asterisk that every woman is. A house of light, that even when broken, she can glow. That healing isn't loud, it's faithful." Asterisk, she placed it beneath the photo, Blessing for every woman who walked through the door. Love looked different now. It wasn't grand declarations. Under moonlight or breathless phone calls in the middle of the night, it didn't ride in on a wave of longing or leave her dizzy with doubt. It didn't ask her to prove herself. It didn't stretch her thin or hollow her out. It didn't come wrapped in potential. It came wrapped in peace. Aaliyah stood in the mirror, adjusting the sleeves of a linen dress the color of sage leaves. Her hair was in a soft twist out, pinned to one side with a wooden clip shaped like a butterfly. She wasn't dressing up for anyone in particular, just herself. A new ritual, born from the quiet vow she made the night Elon walked away for good. You will not shrink to be loved again. Outside, the rain fell gently, tapping the windows in a rhythm that felt almost intimate. The shop was closed for the day. She had cleared her schedule intentionally, setting time aside for something new, something unplanned. She was going on a date. With Malik, it had started casually. He had visited the shop a few times, mostly quiet, respectful, always buying the same herbal balm and leaving kind notes in the community journal. One day he brought her a bag of dried hibiscus flowers from a local garden with a handwritten note. "In case you want to make your own blend again." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was intentional. When he finally asked her out after 3 months of small talk and exchanged glances, he didn't push. Simply said, "If you ever feel like dinner, I'd like to know more about the woman behind the sanctuary." She had smiled. "Let you know," and she had. Tonight was the night. Malik chose a cozy Moroccan spot tucked between a bookstore and a plant shop. It had lanterns in the windows and soft music playing, guitar and oud weaving through conversations like threads of silk. When Aaliyah walked in, he was already there, wearing a soft navy shirt and a calm smile that matched the mood of the place. "You look radiant," he said as he stood to greet her. She gave a quiet, appreciative smile. "Thank you for picking somewhere like this." They sat at a corner table. The air smelled like saffron and mint. Conversation flowed easily about childhood memories, travel dreams, favorite books. There were no interrogations, just presence. At one point, Malik leaned back and said, "You don't talk about the past much." Aaliyah stirred her tea slowly. "Some of it doesn't need to be relived, and some of it is still healing." He nodded. "Fair." There was a beat of silence, then she added, "I loved someone once. Deeply. So deeply I forgot myself." Malik didn't flinch, and when it ended, I realized I had built an altar to a version of love that didn't include me. So now, I'm learning what it means to choose love that doesn't require a sacrifice of self. He smiled softly. "That's the kind of love I want too." They didn't need to say more. After dinner, they walked down the quiet street, Malik holding an umbrella over both their heads. The sidewalk shimmered under the streetlights, puddles reflecting the glow of storefronts. Aaliyah spoke again. "I used to believe love was only real if it hurt, if I bled for it, waited for it, broke for it, and now." Looked up at the night sky, the rain softening into mist. "Now I believe love is real when it holds me. When it reminds me who I am instead of who I'm supposed to be. When it lets me rest." He stopped walking. "You don't have to rush anything," he said. "Not with me. I'm not here to finish your story. I'm just grateful to witness it." Aaliyah felt a knot in her chest untie. This wasn't a man trying to rescue her. This was a man willing to walk beside her. Not as a savior, but as a choice. And that made all the difference. Later that night, she returned home, peeled off her dress, slipped into her softest robe, and curled up with her journal by the window. The city outside was quiet. The storm had passed. A fresh breeze crept in through the open crack, cooling her skin. She flipped to a blank page. April 10, love. It's not what you survive, it's what you choose. It's not the person who arrives with fireworks, but the one who stays. With matches and patience, building warmth, I don't need a love that saves me. I need a love that sees me tonight. I saw the possibility, not of forever, but of ease. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch. She closed the journal, leaned her head back, and exhaled deeply. This was what healing tasted like. Not perfection, not certainty, just the quiet, steady return of her own voice and the courage to use it in love again. It was the softest day of spring, the kind of day when the world felt like it had. Exhaled trees trembling with new leaves, sunlight spilling down in slanted golden lines, and the wind carrying just a trace of lilac. Aaliyah stood barefoot on the back porch of her apartment, sipping ginger tea, her robe grazing her ankles. The quiet wrapped around her like a balm. She had been thinking lately, not in the anxious, spiraling way that used to chase her thoughts. When she was with Elon, this was different. She was reflecting with reverence, looking back at the woman she used to be, the girl who poured from an empty cup, the partner who sold a house for a man who could barely hold a conversation without snapping, the believer who thought her worth could be measured by how much pain she endured without leaving. But here's what startled her the most. She didn't resent that woman. She pitied her. Yes, she mourned her. She even wanted to go back and hold her sometimes. But mostly, she was grateful, because that breaking, that season of sacrifice, silence, and slow unraveling, it made room for everything sacred in her life now. Aaliyah took a sip of tea, and walked back inside. Her phone buzzed gently on the counter. A text from Malik, thinking of you. Hope the sun touches you kindly today. She smiled, heart swelling not with urgency, but with a steady sense of being seen. There was no chasing here. No, guessing. Just calm. She set the phone down and turned toward her notebook. Today felt like a day to write something she hadn't been able to say out loud. She opened to a fresh page. April 18th. I used to think breaking meant failure. Now, see it for what it was. An opening. Elon didn't ruin me. He revealed me. He peeled back the layers. I'd wrapped myself in performance, people-pleasing, fear of being alone. He exposed every lie I believed about love, that it must be earned, that it comes after sacrifice, that it will finally arrive when I am small enough to deserve it. But God met me in the truck, in the hunger, in the cold nights. I wept silently so I wouldn't disturb his sleep, and in that breaking, I found a blessing. She closed the journal slowly, tears welling not from sadness, but from sacred understanding. She had survived, but more than that, she had bloomed. Later that week, she was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event hosted by Root and Ritual. It wasn't her first time speaking publicly, but this felt different. The audience wasn't strangers. Many of the women there were familiar shop owners, makers, artists, and healers. Women who had cried in her store, women who had sat in her rest circles, women who had become community. She wore all white a linen jumpsuit, bare shoulders, her hair in soft waves. She stood on the small stage in the corner of the botanical cope space. Plants hanging from every wall, sunlight dappling the floor, like lace. When the mic was handed to her, she took a breath and didn't speak from notes. She spoke from memory. I used to think healing was a destination, she began. If I just made it to the next job or the next relationship or the next version of myself, I'd finally feel whole. She looked out across the room, eyes catching on Kendra, on Malik near the back, on a young woman she once held while she sobbed in the store's journaling corner. But I learned something in the breaking. I want to say this especially to the woman here tonight who is still in her breaking. There is nothing wrong with you. A hush fell over the room. You are not broken because you loved someone who didn't love you back the way you needed. You are not foolish for believing in someone's dream. You are not behind because you had to start over. Pause. I lost everything. I gave up my home, my comfort, my security, for someone who forgot me the moment he arrived at the top. And when he left, I thought it meant I was unworthy. Her voice trembled, but she held steady. But what I didn't know was that God was never trying to destroy me. He was clearing space for something better, something rooted, something that included me. A few women in the front row wiped their cheeks. Others nodded slowly. Aaliyah smiled. I stand before you now, not because I found new love or because my business is thriving, but because I finally found myself and I learned to love her. Applause followed, but more than that, tenergy. The kind that hummed in the chest, the kind that said, me too. That night, Malik walked her home. He didn't say much, just held her hand and let her walk in silence. When they reached her door, he kissed her gently on the forehead. I hope you're proud of her, he whispered. Who? She asked. The version of you who kept going when it all fell apart? Leah smiled. I am, she said. And she meant it. There was a room she used to dream about, not a room in any specific building or decorated in any particular way, just a room where she could exhale. A room that belonged to her completely, space not borrowed, not shared out of obligation, not offered as a last resort, but hers. Aaliyah hadn't known what to call it back then. In the years she spent curled, up on the far side of a mattress, while Elon scribbled ideas into a journal, in the cold silence of the abandoned truck, with condensation clinging to the windows, in the storage units she once visited, retrieving pieces of the life she thought she'd build. Back then, that dream room felt like fiction, a privilege for other women. Women with fathers who left them inheritances, women who didn't have to choose between love and logic, women who hadn't bartered themselves for hope, but now she was standing in it. Her name wasn't just on the lease, it was on the door. It was on the door. Aaliyah Grace. Wellness Studio. The sign was still temporary, painted by Kendra's cousin with care, and taped to the frosted glass, but it was real. It sat above the entrance of the second space she had opened, just 2 blocks from Geneva Grace. Apothecary. A natural extension. Quiet expansion of everything she had built. This wasn't just retail. This was retreat inside. The walls were soft clay pink, the kind of hue that made people feel immediately safe. The floors were polished oak. The air smelled of cedar and chamomile. Floor cushions lined one wall, and there were baskets of blankets and handmade, journals in every corner. It wasn't just a studio. It was a room where women could come home. To themselves, she opened the door slowly and stepped inside. Alone, before the first group arrived. Before the movement, the prayer, the tears. She walked through the silence of her own making, hand brushing the shelf where essential oils stood waiting, the low table where affirmation cards had been arranged, and then she whispered it. To no one but herself. To the echoes in her chest. This is mine. It's not inherited. It's not begged for. Not gifted out of pity created. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that truth settle in her bones. The first workshop was called Stillness and Self. It wasn't a yoga class or a seminar or a sermon, just space. Guided breathwork. Gentle prompts. Permission to be. 12 women came, some familiar from the apothecary, some new drawn in by word of mouth or a flyer at the juice. Bar down the street, Aaliyah greeted them one by one with a hug or a warm hand to the shoulder. They all carried something: tired eyes, quiet grief, guarded posture. But as the session began, those edges softened. She guided them through breath, through silence, through small truths spoken aloud. I forgive the version of me who didn't know better. I deserve peace, even if I have to give it to myself. I'm allowed to take up space? Tears came, gentle, unforced. Like rain that had waited too long. By the time the session ended, no one rushed to leave. They sat together, passing around tea and honey, talking in low tones like sisters after a storm. And Aaliyah. She just watched. Not as a savior, not even as a leader, but as a witness. Keeper of space. A woman who had once given her entire life to a man's dream and now stood inside a vision of her own. That night, she returned to her apartment and took a long bath in rose petals and warm milk. Her skin smelled like clarity. Her breath was slow. Her hands no longer trembled. She wrapped herself in a thick robe, poured a glass of water, and curled up with her journal beneath her mother's photo. She flipped to a fresh page and began to write. April 24th, I used to believe the best I could do was survive in someone else's space. Now I know I can build my own room with my name on it, my scent in the air, my prayers in the walls. A space that does not ask me to earn my place. This room, this studio, this sanctuary is more than a milestone. It is proof that beginnings can be soft, that peace can be chosen, that love can first arrive. It's through your own hands. I made this, and no one can take it from me. She pressed the pen to the page. A moment longer before closing the journal, then she stood. She walked to the mirror not out of vanity, but honor. She looked at her reflection. Thank you. She whispered to the woman looking back, not just for surviving, but for refusing to disappear. Some inherit money, some inherit land. Aaliyah inherited fire, not the destructive kind, but the sacred kind, the kind that warmed rooms, lit candles, and carved new paths through darkness. It burned in her bones, quiet and unyielding. A gift passed down from her mother, not through documents or deeds, but through prayer, resilience, unspoken wisdom. It was only now, years after Geneva Grace's passing, that Aaliyah truly understood. The legacy her mother left behind, she had thought the house was the inheritance. She had thought the loss of it was the end of everything. But as she stood now in the soft, echoing hush of her wellness studio, after a session where a woman had wept in her arms and whispered, I didn't know I was allowed to stop hurting Aaliyah, knew the truth. Her inheritance wasn't property, it was purpose. Later that evening, Aaliyah visited the old neighborhood, not out of nostalgia, not to chase ghosts, because she needed to see it with new eyes. The lot where her mother's house once stood had been rebuilt. It was a sleek, modern home now, tall windows, sterile landscaping, a for sale sign staked into the ground. There were no traces of the creaky porch, the wind chimes, or the garden her mother tended with trembling knees. Aaliyah didn't approach the new house. She stood across the street instead, arms folded over her chest, remembering the sound of her mother's slippers dragging against hardwood, a scent of shea butter and peppermint in the bathroom, the hallway where they argued about Elon's place in her life. You think love is supposed to hurt because you don't know your worth yet. Her mother had once said, but baby, my worth isn't yours to carry. God, you have to find your own. Aaliyah had slammed the door in response that day now, standing across the street from that memory. She whispered into the breeze, I found it, Mama. Tears welled, but they didn't fall. They weren't needed. The fire in her chest burned steady. She walked away without looking back. Back home. She opened the carved wooden box that sat on her dresser. Inside were a few things she had salvaged before leaving the house for good: her mother's gold wedding ring, old recipe card for lemon oil skin tonic, and a folded piece of paper she had never dared read until now. The handwriting was familiar, graceful, sharp. She unfolded the page and sat on the edge of her bed. To my daughter, Aaliyah. If you're reading this, it means I've gone home. And I hope you know that everything I left you, material or not, was given with love, not guilt. You were never meant to inherit my battles, only my strength. And if the house I leave you becomes a burden, don't carry it out of obligation. Let it go, because baby, you are the home, you are the house I built. Keep your light on, Mom Aaliyah. Pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. How had her mother known? How had she seen so far ahead into a life Aaliyah hadn't yet begun to imagine? She whispered. Through a thick throat, I kept the light on, Mama, even when it almost went out. The next day, she stood in her shop, preparing a new product for a limited spring release, Legacy Balm. It was rich with neroli frankincense, and she infused with calendula and gratitude. She poured the melted oil slowly into hand-labeled jars, each one marked with a simple quote at the bottom. You are the house your mother built. When the balm was ready, she held one in her hand and stared at it for a long moment. Then she wrapped it carefully in linen and placed it on the altar in the corner of the shop beneath her mother's photo, next to the framed card of things my mother knew. Customers would pass by, and some would pause. Some would touch the photo gently. Some would close their eyes and breathe it in. But Aaliyah knew. This wasn't a product. It was testimony that evening. She hosted a private gathering at the Studio A circle of women who had been with her from the beginning. Kendra, Aunt B, a few rest circle regulars. Malik, sitting quietly in the back, never overstepping, always showing up. They lit candles and shared stories. One woman spoke of leaving a toxic marriage. Another spoke of finally learning to rest without guilt. And Aaliyah, when her turn came, stood in the center and said, "I lost everything once. And what I found was that what truly belonged to me could not be taken. Not a house, not a man, not even peace." She smiled gently. "I was never meant to inherit things," she said. "I was meant to inherit truth. And now I pass that on to every woman who walks through these doors." Applause didn't follow, just a reverent silence. Sometimes the deepest words don't need noise. Sometimes they just need room. It began the way the most sacred things often do, not with fireworks, but with stillness. Aaliyah woke to birdsong. Soft and high, outside the window. The sun filtered through the curtains like a quiet invitation. She lay still in bed for a moment, her hand on her belly, her breath deep and slow. The old panic that used to curl in her chest first thing in the morning was long gone, replaced by a peace that stretched unbothered across the walls of her new life. Today marked 1 year since the doors of Geneva Grace Wellness Studio first opened. 12 months. 365 days of softness, strength, vulnerability, and vision. She sat up and reached for her robe, the cream-colored one, embroidered with her initials. The fabric held the scent of neroli and rose water. Downstairs, the kettle hummed. Malik had stayed over the night before still. Asleep, no doubt, sprawled diagonally, snoring quietly like he always did when deeply at ease, deeply at ease. The thought made her smile. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and she had learned to treasure that more than anything. The celebration was simple. It's just like she wanted. A garden brunch behind the studio where wind chimes sang in the trees and wildflowers grew in bursts of color.
No.
Long wooden tables were covered in white linen, scattered with candles, ceramic plates, fresh fruit, and handwritten affirmation cards at each seat. The guests were all women who had helped her become who she was now. Kendra brought the music and the laughter. Aunt B brought the banana pudding and the stories. Malik came later with 24 hand-picked tulips and a quiet kiss on her cheek. "You did this," he said softly, looking around. Aaliyah nodded. "We did. All of us." She stood near the back fence for a while, watching the women eat and laugh. Someone was reading one of the affirmation cards aloud. Children ran between legs, dragging scarves and sparklers. The smell of roasted vegetables and cinnamon filled the air. This was joy that didn't ask her to, trade herself to receive it. This was joy that included her. She took a deep breath, then walked to the center of the gathering and clinked a spoon against her glass. The chatter quieted. All eyes turned to her. She smiled. "You all know I'm not one for long speeches anymore," she began. "But today means more to me than most people understand." She paused. "There was a time not long ago when I believed my best years were behind me. The man I had loved had taken everything from me, my home, my savings, my sense of worth. I thought I'd given it all away and had nothing left." Heads nodded. A few women murmured mem. "But the truth is," Aaliyah continued, "that loss carved out the space I needed to build this." She looked around. "This community, this peace. This version of myself I finally recognize when I look in the mirror." Tears gathered, but they didn't fall. "I used to think love had to hurt, that struggle was the price you paid for belonging. But now I know love is what holds you, not what breaks you." She gestured toward the women seated in front of her. "You all helped me remember that. And today isn't just an anniversary. It's a declaration that joy is not a reward, it's a right. Healing is not weakness, it's a revolution. And that every single woman here is deserving of a life that honors her fully." Applause, gentle, then strong. Malik placed a hand on her lower back as she stepped down, his presence quiet, anchoring. She leaned into it, just enough to say thank you. That night, she sat in the shop alone. The sun had dipped below the horizon. The studio was locked, the garden cleaned up. A few leftover tulips sat in a jar on the counter. She poured a cup of tea and opened her journal one last time. The cover was worn, now creased at the edges. Its pages full of her life in pieces. She flipped to the final page. April 30. I thought the story ended when he left. I thought the pain was the last chapter, but it wasn't. The silence that followed his absence was not emptiness. It was space. And I filled it with truth, with herbs and hope, with rest and resistance, with softness and steel. I found myself in that space, and then I built a life that finally made room for me. This is the rest of my life, and I will live it gently, fiercely, honestly, and free. She closed the journal, tucked it onto the shelf, beside the last jar of legacy balm. Then she walked out the front door, turned the key, and smiled up at the gold lettering painted across the window. Geneva Grace. Her mother's name, her inheritance, her beginning, and now her forever.